The Overwatch League was a moment in time. A multinational league with 8-figure investments from some of the world's richest men who own storied franchises in sports, hosting events at huge venues like the Barclays Center, and allowing DJ Khaled to do this for some reason.
Overwatch League!
Surely, the Overwatch League was serious business, and they certainly took themselves that way, comparing the league to the NBA, NFL, and even getting sued by the MLB for having a similar logo. They were locked in. But by the end, all of the things that made the Overwatch League look like it was going to be successful at the beginning were gone. Investors had pulled out, teams had imploded for financial issues, and the 2023 finals was hosted in a half-sold-out community college hockey arena in Toronto. Franchisees invested $20 million to get a spot in the league for the first season, while by the second year, spots were worth between $35 and $60 million. In 2023, Blizzard offered these teams a $6 million buyout to give up their spot, to which most teams agreed. I haven't seen a video made about why the Overwatch League failed by someone who actually likes the game and knows the community, but I unfortunately do. There were certainly some bumps along the way, like how Blizzard tanked any revenue by being full of weeaboos, or how the most famous player in League history got kicked out for trying to have some banter, but I think there are 10 main reasons why Overwatch League failed, and the most important one is going to be at the end of this video, so stick around. The first of which is the inconsistency brought about by the video game industry. Games are constantly updating, metas come and go, and even in Overwatch's case, they released a whole new game that literally eliminated the need for a player on a roster. The first meta in the Overwatch League was Dive, with the classic Winston D.Va, and in the first map of Overwatch League history, Dante on Junkrat for some reason. Early on, players just stayed to their comfort pick, which were mostly Tracer and Genji for DPS, Zen for support, and D.Va for off-tank players. For basically 5 straight years, off-tank players only had to play D.Va, man, what a dream. But of course, more heroes were added, and the meta changed to GOATs for the following season. This is where it became clear that despite funding the Overwatch League, Overwatch was not balanced around professional play, nor was it considered super important in the early days. With the release of the most evil hero ever, Brigitte, in March of 2018, and the invent of GOATs meta soon after, the league stopped changing. Blizzard, the company, started going through hard times, Overwatch was not the main development focus, and the game was left to rot with one hero dominating the meta for the entire year. DPS players were forced to play an entirely different role that they weren't used to at all. Dudes who played Genji their whole life were absolutely running it down on Brig. I'm sure some of you don't remember, but Prophet, for example, was so ass at Brig, it was like watching 50-year-old Mike Tyson trying to walk around a boxing ring. You could literally see bro's body decomposing at the monitor, man. He wasn't sleeping behind the wheel, he was dead. When updates did come, Baptiste was added as a way to try to move away from Brig and add some DPS to the support role, but it really just wasn't enough, and Brig only stopped being hard meta when 222 Rollock was added in July of 2019. This basically made Overwatch a different game. Strategies depending on players' flexibility were now obsolete, like the early Overwatch League playoffs meta where Zen players played Roadhog. Certain players' main selling point of flexibility was diminished because they now had to get up in the middle of a match, switch seats, and calibrate to an entirely different setup. Yes, that's really how they did it, and it happened. To add on to that, Blizzard actually did go and drop another Overwatch and delete the first one. Not only did the game change, the game changed. Bars. This is completely different than other leagues that Overwatch League was trying to seem as legitimate as. I'm a huge fan of basketball, I've played my whole life, I'm large, and while I'm absolutely fucking horrible at it, I always know what to expect when I play or watch the NBA. Adam Silver will never announce Basketball 2 where the nets are 20 feet wide, height is capped at 5'8", and LeBron James is ritualistically executed at half court in the inaugural game. But Blizzard actually did that, literally sacrificing one tank player into a volcano from each team, which led to a bunch of tank players getting dropped. Speaking more on the topic of balance, because this is honestly the most boring reason the league failed, heroes on launch are designed to be absolutely broken. If they weren't, nobody would bother to learn them or play them. Sigma on launch was crazy strong. Juno had Transcendence level healing and Mercy's damage boost, basically on a cooldown because her ult charged so fast, and now Wu Yang is just Zenyatta with good movement. Kiriko's been in the game for coming up on 4 years, and she's still ridiculously powerful. Who decided to let a hero do 120 damage on a headshot? These heroes disrupt the game and could even threaten players' livelihoods if they couldn't figure them out. For you and me, these are just fun little quirks of the game, but for these players, this really has an impact on their career. Moreover, the devs are incapable of balancing around pro players because they suck at the game. This gameplay footage is from 10 years ago and they have gotten no better. These days, I think the developers have really improved when it comes to balance, but during the Overwatch League, when teams and players were less flexible, the developers' inability to understand the game at a high level stopped them from making the best decisions. If they did listen to pro players, there's absolutely no way Adolf Hitler in Japanese clothing, Kiriko, would have been added to the game. What a ridiculous hero. These types of changes led to players and viewers having much less trust in developers, and all of that can be traced back to the GOATs meta. Players were beyond vocal about their hatred of goats. DPS players were stuck on one of the most boring heroes ever introduced to the game just because of how strong she was, and if they were really lucky, maybe they got put on the second most boring hero in the Ghost meta, D.Va. Some DPS players did get to play Zarya and keep that damage roll feel, but it very obviously wasn't the same. Pro players and content creators these days at least have some direct line of communication with the developers, and it's really the worst kept secret ever. I mean, they have a Discord server, but in the before times, there was really no way for a player to communicate with developers about what changes they wanted to see. The most direct way in the first stage at least was to just get up in an interview and complain like Hydration did here.
There's never a good situation to use that thing. Whenever you pull it, 6 players will look at you, they will use every single cooldown on you, and you're just going to get booped all over the map, and then you're going to miss all your slashes, and then your dash is going to get messed up, and you're going to die.
But obviously that's no way to voice serious complaints. Less trust in the game's development left players frustrated, and when they encountered difficulties with the metas, their reaction was not to hope for things to get better, like in other games, or communicate what changes they want to see. They just quit the game because they had no hope that things would actually get better, and there were probably greener pastures with new Overwatch killers coming out for them to play every day. They also stifled the growth of the game as new players heard about Blizzard's poor balancing because pro players complained on Twitter so much, and it ruined people's perception, which stopped them from playing. Other games like Valorant, or these days Marvel Rivals, were just more appealing. Overwatch is a difficult game, and players who are really good at it are destined to be good at other games. When Overwatch players switch over, at least at first, they are the best at whatever they play. We saw this in Valorant with players like Hip and his team, which eventually became Ninjas in Pajamas, and nowadays in Marvel Rivals with the best team in Europe being 5 Overwatch players. Rivals is also just piss easy, for being honest, so it's like Albert Einstein competing in a first grade spelling bee, but still, new games also pay really well because there's always hope that the game is going to be the next big thing. So there's just so much more money to be made by switching games whenever a new one comes out. This leads to my next point, which is that Overwatch League's players were just untrustworthy. If you have never seen one of my videos before, I implore you to open my channel on another tab and look at the hour of content I have made just about players being bad people or just generally insane. But beyond that, players were brand risks, had crazy churn, and to be honest caused a lot of the problems in the league. Outside of players leaving Overwatch to go play other games, churn was also caused by players' roles dissolving or their hero not being meta anymore. One example of this is Who Are You? He plays Genji. That's it. If Genji is not meta, he does not play Overwatch. He's stuck around though, playing at the highest level since 2016, and he has gone from 13-year-old prodigy to resident Korean unk. If you tell an Overwatch player these days that their hero is trash, they don't even quit the game immediately, they will just kill you first. Churn was a crazy problem in the league though, as from season to season, entire rosters of players were dropped all at once. In one season of Overwatch League, the LA Valiant signed and dropped 2 whole unique teams of players. The problem was created by teams and the league themselves as financial volatility changed teams' abilities to pay players throughout the year. The LA Valiant were so broke that they couldn't pay $70 for a player's flight so we could come trial for them, and intentionally sandbagged to miss playoffs because even if they made it, they couldn't afford to fly their team there. They were so terribly run, they lost their Twitter password and their Twitter was dead for 2 years. This was an organizational problem, and many orgs faced similar situations, like the Titans and Eternal, as owning an Overwatch League franchise was like throwing diamonds into the void in Minecraft. It was just a complete waste of time and resources, especially for the rich owners of the league. Every year funding decreased, and I'll touch on it more later, but staff was cut, players' salary decreased, and the original reason for a franchise league's existence, stability for players and staff, was towards the end a complete afterthought. Another reason for churn is the insane amount of hours players worked. Coaches like Lori, the head coach of Boston Uprising from 2020 to 2022, were genuinely evil to players. Here's one of his players to elaborate on his methods.
He'd make us do laps. He wouldn't let me eat. He had all of us. Mate, he did. He put. I was fit, man. Like, we were running. I wasn't eating. We would do 3-hour VOD reviews where we'd have to be in a push-up plank position. He'd call us in, we'd watch the whole map, like, really slowly, and as soon as one of us did a mistake or something, and he'd ask, he'd be like, what'd you do wrong? And unless you gave him exactly what he wanted, or, to be honest, it probably wouldn't even matter, he would say, get down. And then I was like, what?
Beyond physical abuse, it was expected that players would scrim all day. Players like XQC would scrim in the morning, then stream at night. He's an exception. I mean, that guy truly has no brain in his head, so he could take it. But especially teams with Korean coaches were expected to be working all the time, and you can't expect everyone to be XQC. One coach even described how his job was 8 AM to 9 PM, and most of the time was scrimming or analyzing VODs to hold reviews with players. He was not compensated for this extra time, but he was still expected to be there, but I'll elaborate more at the end of the video. players and coaches faced extreme burnout, and these are just a few incidents that we know of. Not all players are complete androids who want to play Overwatch all day, and for what it's worth, the team that's been the best in recent times, Crazy Raccoon, have a much more balanced practice schedule while still dominating, so maybe other teams will learn from them. This is obviously a top-down issue, and it's not entirely on the coaches or the players, but the players and coaches certainly did cause some problems for the league. The other problem with players was just them being general brand risks, and I think there are 3 main examples from the players and one from Blizzard themselves that contributed to the league's downfall. I've already talked about these issues basically ad nauseum, so I'm just going to sum them up for those who don't know. The problems with players started with XQC. Within the first few months of the league's existence, he went from an unknown to the most popular player in the league, defined for most of the money from his contract, and booted from the league without so much as a goodbye. It started out with a homophobic remark to an openly gay player where he told him to go suck a dick, but later retracted that insult by saying that he would probably enjoy that. This led to a fine, but he was kicked out of the league for a later racist remark when he spammed the tryhard emote in Overwatch League when Malik, a black commentator, was on screen. Regardless of what you think about punishments for those things being so harsh, these incidents dissuaded some sponsors and it began the negative perception around the league. The second incident though ruined the Overwatch League's perception for outsiders, and yeah, for good reason. Dream Casper was one of the best American DPS players, which is unfortunate to say because he was also a pedophile who dated a 14-year-old girl and tried to meet up with her multiple times for illicit activities. It's impossible to talk about the history of Overwatch League without mentioning this. This is where things really started to go south. The Boston Uprising's action was swift and decisive, and he was gone immediately, but the damage had already been done. Gamers and pro players were already seen as losers, and this was just further confirmation for outsiders. If sponsors weren't interested before, they certainly weren't then. This incident certainly tarnished any positive reputation the Overwatch League had outside of the scene, but the next one poisoned the well, especially for those invested in the community. In 2020, former League MVP and one of the highest paid Overwatch players of all time, Sinatraa, retired from Overwatch to pursue a career in Valorant. In 2021, an ex-girlfriend of his came forward claiming that Sinatraa had assaulted her while they were together, among other horrible things. Once again, action by the Valorant scene was swift, with him being suspended for 6 months, and an investigation was started by the San Francisco Shock and the Overwatch League. His ex-girlfriend brought a case against him that she later suspended for mental health reasons. The investigations from Valorant and Overwatch League were inconclusive, and Sinatraa was uncooperative with Valorant at least. His MVP skin was removed from Overwatch permanently, and tokens used to buy it were refunded. No one was happy with how this was handled. Some said that the investigations from the leagues were not thorough enough, while Sinatraa supporters said that removing the skin was wrong when nothing could be proven. I won't tell you what to believe, watch my old videos if you want to know how I really feel about it, but regardless, this incident caused a lot of turmoil within Overwatch that put a sour taste in everyone's mouths. The last incident was what really cut off all of the Overwatch League's funding. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm going to make a separate video about this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but in late 2021, half of all Overwatch League sponsors dropped out because of controversy with Blizzard Entertainment. There were a plethora of problems within Blizzard, from owning a hotel room called the Cosby Suite with a framed picture of him, to stealing breast milk from company fridges that obviously other companies did not want to be associated with, and companies like Cheez-It and T-Mobile swiftly ended their partnership with the league. The risks brought on by promoting players and giving them MVP skins and other benefits led to another problem with the league's marketability: their lack of a face. After being burned by these situations, Blizzard basically stopped promoting certain players because it was too risky. The first season of Overwatch League had so many memorable personalities. XQC, Seagull, Super, Space, Custa, these guys even had their own shows, their own trailers. In the second season, 2 players from the championship winning team, Sinatraa and Super, went on Jimmy Fallon. Super even went on the next year after winning another championship. Then, after Super retired, there was no one. The most interesting player in the league was like Sparkle, because he was straight up insane. Or later on, Sugar Free, but he's a convicted cannibal. It wasn't just viewers who felt this way. Players felt it too.
No one was either entertaining, or anyone that was entertaining had no way or reason to even be entertaining. If tweeting Ryan Mirror at Haddy is too much for the Overwatch community to handle.
Interesting players had absolutely no reason to stay in the league. Why would you grind all day, making no money, when you could stream instead and try to launch a career that way? XQC in his streaming career has probably made more actual revenue than the Overwatch League ever did. He makes at least $4 million a year from just streaming, and he signed a $100 million contract with Kick. The Overwatch League was actively losing money. How could a player look at that and stick around in the league? Even a more modern example is Super, who left the league to focus on streaming and is now a Ludwig acolyte doing huge collaborations. So undeserved. You know what? If you want to take more opportunities away from supertf, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more enticing Overwatch content. Also consider clicking that join button to help me make more videos. Shout out to the channel members on the second tier, Piggles and Left Y. And if you want to hear your name in my videos, click that button. Do it right now. Anyways, really only Americans could be widely popular and marketed by the league. And as the league became more and more Korean, there were less opportunities to market the game in traditional American markets. There were attempts, and Chinese Overwatch League players are certainly very popular on Bilibili, and as a certified white Zhongguoren, I understand them perfectly, but marketing non-English speaking individuals was a unique challenge faced by such a diverse league. Again, for comparison to the NBA, non-American players are harder to market. Giannis, for example, came into the league speaking absolutely no English, and despite having one of the most inspirational stories ever, he hasn't gotten the same marketing as, say, a LeBron, because his story is not as relatable for the American viewer. Maybe this is just my opinion as an American, but I certainly feel that it's harder for even global leagues to market non-American players to American audiences and have them understand their story. I'm not trying to say that Korean or Chinese players are inferior or boring in any way, but perceptions are different because of the language barrier. It's easy to look at Korean players as cute and innocent, when in reality, there are really toxic aspects of Korean teams, just like mostly Western teams. The Atlanta Reign bullied Donghak so bad that he cried every day when practicing. He was 17 years old and the youngest Overwatch League player of all time. This certainly happened with primarily Western teams, but it's important to remember that everyone in the league is human and has their flaws, regardless of if they speak English or not. The language barrier also impacted players' marketability, as having a translator just adds an extra layer of friction that stops fans from making a personal connection, which might actually have been a good thing for the players ultimately. But still, watching interviews live with the translator on the broadcast was so boring. At the end of the day, Blizzard's bread is buttered by American consumers, as most in-person events were held in the US and Blizzard is an American company. There is just no world where Heesang goes on Jimmy Kimmel Live to talk about the game, or Guzhwei pops up on Disney XD or ESPN. Also, especially in the 2020 COVID period, I hate to say it, but people were just extremely sensitive online. We all just had way too much time on our hands. Whenever players tried to be competitive or talk shit or try to stoke some competition, they were like cancelled or treated like they were crazy. When behind the scenes, literally everyone was doing it. Gator and Dogman from the Atlanta Reign were especially known for this, but no one liked them because when they would talk on Twitter, it was toxic, not competitive. That was also just terrible for the league, because the players were not allowed to form rivalries or buy into their matchup because any public trash talk would turn the community against them. I think that has largely gone away over the years, thank God, but most players still do not talk trash publicly, I think out of fear. But the league's direction was also proving to be problematic. From the start, it was clear that Blizzard had planned for events to be played in person. In the inaugural season, games were played in Blizzard Arena in Burbank, and teams were mostly living in LA or the surrounding area. The vision for the league, though, was to have teams play in their own city to create more interest for that fanbase. I actually think this is a pretty solid idea in essence, and the homestands that did take place did really well. The one I remember the most was Washington Justice's homestand, and despite being a team whose roster consisted of shit from a butt, this event still sold out and was really cool. Fan interest was up, people cared more about the team, and the players felt like there was more of a reason to compete. The downside, though, immediately became pretty apparent. The globalization of the league created some absurd travel schedules. If teams returned back to their original city after a homestand, then teams would have an average of 105,000 miles traveled in an Overwatch League season. The furthest distance traveled for an NBA team in 2024 was 42,000 miles by the Dallas Mavericks, and they play a longer season. Even if teams did not return back to their origin city, the distances were still absurd. The most reasonable distance was the Justice, who hosted the most homestands, as they somehow, in the grand scheme of things, were in the most central location. They only traveled 21,000 miles, but the Spitfire would have traveled 75,000 miles over the course of the season. That's 21,724 nautical leagues for the Europeans out there. But the real nail in the coffin was, of course, COVID. They tried to bring them back post-COVID, but it just never really worked out. COVID, though, really was a huge blow for the Overwatch League, esports, and sports as a whole. On the surface, COVID viewership was better than ever. The 2020 finals had 180,000 viewers at its peak in the US, and over 1.5 million total unique viewers, most of which were in China. Other sources, though, claim that Chinese viewership numbers are incredibly unreliable, and some publications didn't even take it into account when calculating total viewership. Additionally, the viewership would have been an extreme anomaly in the viewership trends. Viewership was on a constant decline since the inaugural season, and other tournaments held in 2020 had extremely low viewership. So how did they actually get high numbers? Well, a lot of them were fake. Blizzard was known for embedding Overwatch League streams into other websites to play in the background while people were browsing. That would be counted as a viewer and would bolster the total. They also offered insane drops, and that's something they absolutely have the right to do and should do for the premier tournaments. But it meant that most people watching were not actually tabbed in and were probably just stroking their Johnson with the stream in the background. Looking outside of esports, the NBA also saw then record low viewership on the NBA Finals, despite having two of the most popular teams facing off and having honestly really good playoffs. Interest in watching other people play sports or video games was down, as people were probably just playing with their own friends because everyone was on all the time. Besides the 1.2 million Americans who died, man, that was good times. Viewership was of course a major problem for the league, but they were able to fake it enough for it to not be the main reason why sponsors left or be a huge reason why the league failed. The fake viewership though probably ultimately hurt the league. Brands had a certain expectation of partnered sales based on the number, and when it was not met because most viewers weren't actually watching or could not buy their product because they weren't based in America, they stopped offering big time partnerships. In Season 1, IBM had a partnered website with Blizzard where they kept track of fantasy data, which is one of the coolest partnerships I'd ever seen in esports, and that was not continued because the viewership wasn't what IBM expected. Over time, interest in the league decreased, largely due to problems I've already talked about, and it just never rebounded. Another reason the league closed was because of you. Yes, you. This one is more of a personal opinion, but esports fans are not sports fans, even as much as the Overwatch League wanted them to be. Blizzard thought that just because they had a city model and planned homestands, that fans would associate with the closest team like they do for normal sports, but that just was never going to be the case. Blizzard did not understand the average esports consumer. They really only like between 1 and maybe 2 people and never identify with the team. There was really no diehard fan base started just because of a team's location. Most people chose their affiliation because of a certain player or just because they were the best. There's a reason 90% of Overwatch League fans were San Francisco Shock fans, and it's because they had likable people and they also won all the time. In normal sports, you root for the team your dad roots for. You get maybe one deviation in your fandom. For example, I'm from SoCal. I like the Lakers, 49ers because LA didn't have a team when I was a kid, and my oddball choice is the Orioles. One of my best friends chose wrong when he was a kid, and it's the Clippers and Chargers fan, and now he's stuck with that for his whole life. But in the Overwatch League, there was never any reason to have such an attachment. If your team sucked, you could just change. There was no crazy diehard fandom. Every year, Raiders fans hurt fans of other teams and even themselves just out of pure blind rage and love for the Raiders. There was simply never going to be that kind of love and devotion for the fucking Shanghai Dragons. In sports too, you get to have a favorite team and also a favorite player who might not be on that team. In basketball, I like the Lakers, but I'm also a Trae Young guy, which means that when I went to see Hawks Lakers last year, I got to see Jalen Johnson put his nutsack on Austin Reeves' face in a game. In Overwatch though, they were one and the same. The player you liked dictated the team you liked, not the other way around. And there were really no rivalries outside of Season 1, aside from Valiant and Gladiators, which lasted a little longer. I think that another problem with esports, and Overwatch esports especially, is that Overwatch is a really hard game to understand. I've already made a video about visual clutter, but for a new viewer or player, high-level gameplay is just incomprehensible. The best strats in Platinum will never be the same as the best strats of a team where the guys get paid to play together every day, so there's no real copying. In basketball, I am fully capable of doing whatever Kyrie Irving does if I was given infinite time and resources, but in a team-based game, it's almost impossible to copy what an individual or team does. While I also thought that Overwatch League production was good, and there were certainly some interesting sketches.
Hey, Snella, look, where's the rest of your team? Why are you on a weird dark road with that?
It's the Snillo pillow. It's very nice and comfortable at night, and it's not too bad on the eyes either.
Snella, that's weird as hell. You're walking around with a tiny little pillow version of yourself all the time.
Do not talk about my baby like that.
There was no need for that to be as much breakdown as there was. Dissecting high-level strats is interesting. To 5 people. The rest of everyone there just wants to watch the matches take place. In basketball, the breakdown is easier to understand because basketball, at its core, is a simple game. You just gotta score more points and put a ball in a basket. Overwatch's goals are not that simple. There's so much micro to the game, every character and every player has their own unique goals, and the game is not easy enough to understand for that to be relevant to most people. The breaks were so long. There was halftime, a mid-game breakdown, a million ads on the broadcast, a desk segment after, interviews. It made the whole thing feel legitimate, sure, but there were at least 45 minutes of downtime for every match. For close games, sure, I'd like to see that, but for John Lobob versus Peter McAskerack, I have absolutely zero interest in watching Reinforce flounder around for 20 minutes in front of a fucking whiteboard. This interview on screen was 8 minutes long, and no disrespect, but the guy said absolutely nothing interesting. And when Brennan Sideshow left for Valorant, I'm sorry, but it just got so much less funny. Who else was letting a dude squeeze an orange on his head or chugging maple syrup? The fandom was also just primarily online, which made them extremely reactionary, and even if reception to a tweet was good, it had no bearing on how much money the league was making. Even if the stream had 1 billion viewers, even 1 trillion, very few people were buying stuff from the Overwatch League store, except for me for some reason, and if there were more events, interest around them would eventually die off and attendance would taper off like the final grand finals in Toronto. Is this a massive reason why the league failed? No, but I think it's still relevant enough and proof that even game development companies do not understand the desires of the average esports viewer. Another change that divided fans was a switch from Twitch to YouTube. Blizzard originally signed a 2-year deal with Twitch to stream there exclusively for a lot of money. For all of his evilness, Bobby Kotick was definitely good at extorting rich companies, even his own towards the end. Gotta give the man props. This deal was a horrible money incinerator for Twitch, which is why they chose not to continue the deal and allowed Blizzard to leave. Twitch is a company that loses money every year and only exists because it's subsidized by Amazon, and even later boosts in viewership did not make up for the huge exclusivity deals that platforms were giving out during this period. After that contract, they signed a $160 million deal with YouTube for exclusive streaming rights. This was an absolutely horrible deal for most fans and Blizzard themselves. First of all, Twitch viewership in 2020, the year after the Overwatch League moved, exploded, up 67%, hahaha. YouTube live viewership was up too, but with such terrible discoverability, it was still a horrible move, as the league got 0% of the Twitch viewership pie. There is a world where we could have seen a Sinatraa and PGE collaboration, or IShowSpeed and Lip. But because they went to YouTube, we'll never get to live in that world. This especially hurt them because one way they made money was through their premium pass that gave viewers unprecedented access to player POVs among other benefits. When the league moved to YouTube, the program continued, but due to limitations with YouTube Live, the benefits were never as good, which further disgruntled fans who had paid for that pass. Also, if we're being honest, YouTube Live just sucks. It's worse to use than Twitch, there's more friction, and the chat sucks. Many of these issues have to do with trust. As time went on, it dwindled more and more. It stopped fans from returning to watch broadcasts, turned the chat into a ghost town, and destroyed players' motivations to play the game at the highest level. What once was a vibrant community with fan-packed arenas became just dead. At the Toronto Grand Finals, I saw a tumbleweed roll through the arena. I didn't even know they had those out there. But the last reason is definitely the main reason the Overwatch League failed, and combines all of the previous things I talked about into one. From an executive perspective to a player perspective, all the way down to a viewer perspective, the main problem was the money. It all starts with the players. They are the content. They are what people want to watch, and attracting talent through consistent, decent pay was one of the main selling points of the Overwatch League. Early on, players were getting contracts as high as $150K per year and even higher, but by the end, top tier talent was left so broke that one player was playing from a friend's couch. That player is Yveltal, or Mew, or Xerneas, who made some pretty poor financial decisions, yes, like dropping 50K on Genshin Impact, but he reports making about 60K a year early on, which is quite substantial in China, and later on, he wasn't even making enough to keep himself afloat. The problem has gotten even worse with OWCS. The league minimum was 52K a year, but now players are lucky if they make 36 a year. Fortunately, most of these players were pretty young. It's not like they were supporting a family, and they were able to pivot into real careers later on, but still, it would have been nice. This might beg the question, if the league minimum was 52K, how did Yveltal make a fraction of that in the final seasons of the league? Well, once again, it has to do with globalization. Blizzard had authority over how American teams paid their players, as we have strict laws around minimum wage, but foreign teams were able to skirt those regulations easier. A minimum wage of 52K in China, for example, would be pretty high, so teams negotiated it lower, instead comping housing and giving other benefits to players. This was another reason why teams were so gung-ho about going international. They literally just paid Korean and Chinese players less. The most famous example of a predatory contract was from emongg by the Boston Uprising. He was a highly sought after talent, but only got one direct offer and immediately accepted it, because his agent didn't tell him that all the other teams in the league were also interested in signing him for more money. He could have easily driven up the price if he had known that other teams wanted him, but I covered that in another video, you should go watch that one after this. Most players, and by most I mean all of them, were also on very team-friendly contracts. Overwatch League never had any sort of collective bargaining or players union, likely also due to the fact that it was really hard to organize with players speaking so many different languages. This led to players getting 1+1 contracts, and if the team wanted, they would be brought back for the same contract the following season. If a player was signed on a low contract in year 1 and performed like crazy, the team could just bring them back for the same salary on the second year of that deal. The contracts may have started as guaranteed, but at least by 2020, that was no longer a thing, as Fissure was terminated from his team and never received any compensation from them for the work he did. Looking further, the teams were also not happy. Blizzard never once hit revenue targets, not even for a single season. In retaliation, the owners entered collective bargaining and withheld their payments of fees. Not wanting to suspend the league, Blizzard couldn't do anything but just wait for it all to blow over, which it never really did. Organizations were also left without the ability to support their teams. Jersey sales were non-existent, again, except for me. Interest in Overwatch League tokens and skins waned over time, and without homestands, any of the projected revenue from in-person events was gone. All matches after 2020 were played online except for the playoffs, and orgs certainly missed the extra money. It got so bad that teams had to cut necessary staff. In Season 2, teams had sports psychologists, crazy good facilities, and LA mansions. In the later seasons, teams in America that had Korean rosters fired their translators to save money and just left players high and dry. Back to the players though, they faced immense pressure to sign contracts. Blase, for example, said he was given only a few hours to decide if he wanted to sign to a team or not. And in such a volatile industry, you can never really be sure if there's another offer coming. This also locked players into bad situations. In 2023, Overwatch League players brought up a lawsuit against Activision Blizzard for their competitive balance tax, or salary cap, which artificially kept players' salaries low, especially after 2018. It also cites the issue of unpaid overtime. players were expected to work 60 to 80 hours a week just playing the game, outside of scrimming and VOD review. This doesn't even take into account the hundreds or thousands of hours it takes to get really good at the game in the first place. The lawsuit seeks compensation for that time and more fairness and transparency going forwards. Playing video games for that long may sound great, and yeah, it's not as hard as doing open heart surgery, but doing anything for 80 hours a week will burn you out, and many players were willing to do it because this was their dream, and they thought that's just what you had to do to be at the top. Blizzard was taking advantage of these dreams and even promoting things they knew they couldn't fulfill to players in order to keep players coming in and sell more hopium. The reality is, players were sold on a career that did not exist for them. Maybe it could have, had a million things gone differently, but with so much risk involved and such young players, it was a disaster waiting to happen. It's really terrible what a lot of these players went through, as I'm sure the things I've talked about in this video, from physical and mental abuse to intense bullying, are just the tip of the iceberg, but I hope the players can win the lawsuit and make things right. Viewers were of course impacted by this too, because with players having no incentive to stick around, the product got worse. By the final season, there were 2 teams that had players who had no business being in the league at all. One team had a player who was basically a GM Tracer player that the other guys met on ranked. The talent pool had dissipated as the game's life went on, and it impacted the highest level of the scene. Overwatch League really was a moment in time. Investors were delusional enough to believe that esports could be huge. Players were hopeful to get huge contracts. Robert Kraft was getting jerked off in a Thai massage parlor while buying the Boston Uprising. So why did Overwatch League fail? Blizzard wanted it to be something it was not. An NBA, MLB, and NFL competitor based on a game that they had no intended future for. A chance taken on a proof of concept that played poker with the cards of people's livelihoods. It lacked what everyone wanted to see from a league: authenticity. That's why grassroots scenes last so long. Melee, for example, has had active antagonization from Nintendo for decades, and they have one of the strongest competitive scenes because players are able to get invested into it and see the fruits of their labor. I wanted to end this video on a really positive note, saying that the Overwatch League was fantastic and I hope everyone's doing well, etc, and yeah, it was cool. But it was a league built on false promises from the beginning. From Kotick lying about the scope of it to get more money from consumers and investors, to Blizzard not updating their game for a year, to org scamming players, the Overwatch League never could have been what it was cracked out to be. It's clear that the scope of the league was too large. There was no way to make it work, and Blizzard didn't put in enough guardrails to make sure the players of all nations would be protected adequately. The world is simply not ready for the model that the Overwatch League had, and I really don't think any franchise league like this one will work with in-person events for at least a long time. This once again shows Blizzard's delusion and the lies, even if not intentional, that they sold to fans and players. Worldwide fame and recognition were all but guaranteed, but when it came down to it, Blizzard could not deliver. I really think OWCS is a step in the right direction, and the game is healthier now than it has ever been. Once they stop all the apes from the San Diego Zoo Q-sniping me, ranked will be great, content creators are interested in the game, and there's more positivity around Overwatch than ever before. This is what the game is all about. Hell, this is what gaming is all about. And if Overwatch League was the sacrifice we needed to get that back, then it would have been worth it every time. Subscribe.